Hey, everybody, welcome to Office Hours. I'm look like Bill, but I'm actually me. As you can see, there's, I'm going to start over so that when we cut it. So the back end here is that I'm just going to stop and start, and then they can cut to it later. Hey, everybody, welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk probably about the most important but basic thing, which is called alpha channels. So we're going to talk about how they work and what they actually do, and hopefully that'll illuminate it. Sometimes it's kind of magical for people how those work, or they just hear there's an alpha channel. But what is the difference between a straight alpha channel and a pre-multiplied alpha channel, and why does that even exist? So we'll talk a little bit about that in the second hour. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one comes from John Preto here on the panel, and it's about the show itself. He says, today's another milestone in Office Hours history. Surprise?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Inquiring minds want to know. Pray tell, Preto.
Today is a milestone. I told Alex yesterday that today, episode 890, we are equal with Twit Network today.
With the Twitch show, right?
Twitch,
not the network.
Twitch show.
Yeah, so we have caught up. We caught up in record time. You know, they were lackadaisical, like only doing something once a week. You know, they had no chance against our assault.
Juggernaut, I think is the word that comes.
18 years.
Yeah, exactly. We see, and that tells you where we would be if we had only done it once a week. We would be where we are right now in 18 years instead of a little over 2. So that is the 7 multiplier. So
congrats, Alex.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, everybody. Really well done. It's kind of amazing that we still do this every day for almost next week. It turns out the math was wrong. It's not on the 10th. It's on the 11th. So September 11th is our 900th anniversary. So it'll be a Sunday, and we'll be chit-chatting about that, which is great because the 10th was already really busy. So we have IBC coverage going on the 10th. And so I didn't want to crowd it with more things. And so I was already wanting to do it on the 11th, and it turns out that it's the right time anyway. So we'll be celebrating 900. And of course, I don't even know. We might have to start building a crew to talk about 1,000. That's in December, I think, December 21st or 20th or 19th, somewhere in that range. And then so I'll start thinking about what that's going to look like. All right, let's go to the next question.
I'm just looking for virtual confetti. Next question comes from Andy Carluccio in San Francisco, California. QLab 5 is here. What are you most excited about? And he's got a link to it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, audio, video, and lighting. And the one of the new features is OSC. So that should be interesting. And I'm sure Andy's near and dear to that.
I think that it's increased OSC support. I don't think OSC has been available inside of it. I think that the two things that I'm the most excited about are the increased network commands that are there that I haven't gotten to play with yet, but the network commands that are there, and one at the very bottom of the list was and Zoom OSC. so for the network commands that are supported, as well as the native M1 support. So now it's really taking full advantage of it. I hope to see 10-bit at some point. A lot of the stuff that we do is 10-bit video, but I don't think it made it to this version. So anyway, but I think that it's a great update, and we're going to definitely get those guys back on. So we want to have the QLab team come on and really walk us through what the new features are, and we'll do that hopefully in the next couple of weeks. All right, next, Mitchell, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, price is about $800 some, $9 a day. It's a little pricey.
Yeah, they've got a couple different pricing models, and so you can rent it, I think, by the day, by the month. You can also buy it out if you want to. It's a very powerful application and worth every penny. Next question.
James Hutcherson's on the same subject, actually. He says, in the QLab 5 link that Andy posted here, there's a release video. Could you help explain the setup they'd have to have used to create the projections at the 1 minute mark? They seem to be overlapping and casting shadows. Is that from multiple projectors?
I wasn't able to look at the video before the show, so I can't speak to it directly. But a lot of times you're using, for a lot of these types of presentations, you are blending a series of, let's see here, yeah. So far what I see in the video that we're showing right now is See a brand new video engine. They're really excited. This is all lighting commands. That's still not that's just, to me, that's a composited projector. I don't see multiple projectors there.
Shaped projector onto the physical things.
Yeah, so it would be hard to know what that is, but we can definitely get those folks on and we'll talk about it more in detail. Next question.
Aaron Giancarlo of Flagstaff, Arizona says, looking for a small monitor for fieldwork with HDMI and SDI connections and a reasonable price point. Any suggestions?
Go, Jason.
Easiest way to do this is with Blackmagic. What are they called? I'm blanking. But the Blackmagic.
The 12G.
Thank you. The 12G. Assist. And the video assist, you can get them for a song, used or refurbished if necessary, even go back a generation or two and it's still going to be solid. So you can't lose.
Yeah, I think that there's also some of the other options there are Feel World. I think some folks are using for that. Lilliput, both of those live in so there's kind of in the most cost effective are Lilliput and Feel World. And then in the middle, I would say Atomos that are there, and really Blackmagic is on the top end of the middle. So as far as cost goes, and feature set to some degree, Atomos has really taken this market. I mean, they came out of a very very low end market when they first started, not low end, but middle to low end. And then they just keep investing, and they keep on making their products better. So I think that those are kind of some of the options there. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I would agree with those. What we see moving is the Feel World and that under like $300 price point. Those seem to be popular. It depends on if you want to record, and then also what you're using it for. Are you using it in bright sunlight? You're going to want something with higher nits. Are you using it for HDR? There's another brand, Small HD, which we haven't talked about yet, which is probably the one that I see out there the most, especially in like rental houses and whatnot. But if it's something that you're buying for yourself, I also like the port keys, depending on the camera that you're putting it on. Port keys has some connectors that will allow you to enable touchscreen. So it's a communications format depending on, like with a Red Komodo, you can attach this cable, or you even do wireless, and you can control some of the things like aperture through a bigger screen, because these new form factors on these cameras have really small screens. So they're like a camera brain, and so you really need a bigger monitor to see, to focus, to touch these menus. So I'd be looking at port keys as well.
Mitchell?
Yeah, I have a Feel World, and I have their cousin, the Andy Cine 4K Ultra Bright, and both of them do not have SDIs in and out. Maybe their upper range does. The other thing I'd love to see them do is they have great scopes on them, but they don't have scoped outputs. So it would be nice to have another output that would allow me to use the scoped information on a larger client monitor, for example.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from John Foltz in Seelings Grove, Pennsylvania. He says, I have a student with 2 USB mics and a laptop. They want to record an interview to get a separate track for each mic. What's the preferred method?
Go ahead, Jason.
They're on a Mac. I would say audio hijack and have 2 inputs and split those inputs, and audio hijack will also do the recording for you. On a PC, my go-to method would just be, use something from Adobe and do a multi-track record. It's been a while since I've used a PC to do multiple USB inputs, and I don't miss those days.
Go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to suggest the Rode NT Mini. Nice little set. You get a pair of these for $200. And then you can also go with the Rode Connect software, which is free and allows you to record both of those microphones into the same recorder. And it's free software. It comes with the microphones. It's a really nice little setup. And they sound good. They're dynamic mics, so they don't pick up too much around them.
And I think that the challenge right now is that they already have the mics that they need. I think it's just a matter of figuring out how they're going to record to them. I think it also depends on what platform you're on. So one of the things to look at is you should be able to, as was mentioned before, many of the DAWs, both Reaper and GarageBand and Logic will all just let you define different inputs as for the channels. And I think that you could probably find a way to do it there. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he asks, what would you think of a PCX-like group for those with disabilities or on the spectrum that not only would provide subsidized access to software and or hardware, but training and support services to help them develop their careers?
I think it'd be a great idea. I think it's just a matter of being able to get the resources to make it actually happen. But I think hopefully we would see something like that in the near future. If we could, if the funding and resources were available, I think it'd be a really, really cool thing. Next question.
Greg Gibson, Washington, D.C. Sony is rumored to be announcing a Super 35 or potentially full-frame pan-tilt zoom camera next week featuring technology from the Sony Alpha mirrorless cameras. How big of an impact would this be on the market?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, the Alpha seems to be sort of a proving ground for a lot of Sony technology. It's ended up in a lot of the stuff that's in my FX3 Sony. But I'm in. If they have autofocus, that would be if they had that marvelous Sony autofocus on that would be something.
Go ahead, Bill.
Autofocus and or low light, because Alpha series cameras were notorious, particularly back in their early days, for being exceptional in low light. Now, they're not at the level of the Canon that Alex talks to us about occasionally, that is like way outside of ridiculous. But the Sonys, I've shot literally still photos with long exposures and almost no light. And what impressed me a lot was that their circuitry is so clean that there was very little noise, even though it was amplifying signals that were very, very small, a ton. So good job, Sony.
Good guy.
Well, let's see if that's what it is. I mean, it could be a Ronin-like device, so it's all rumor right now. But it's either going to be one of two things. It's going to be like that gimbal that we see on the Ronin 4, which is like $7,000 for that camera, or it's going to be a PTZ with an E-mount. So if we get the E-mount and it's a full frame, the lens that we used when we shot it, the wedding that we did, was it last week, week and a half ago, was this lens, which is a 28-135. So you're talking about one of the few servo. So the Z in zoom, the Z in PTZ is zoom. And so if you slap a regular E-mount lens, it's not going to have the Z part. So to step into that league, you're going to be looking at $2,500. And 28-135, that's not much of a range. I mean, sure, we're going to get beautiful images out of a full frame camera, and I don't know why Blackmagic hasn't come to the table with one of these yet. Maybe they will in the Micro Four Thirds League, but we're most likely going to see is either Super 35 or a full frame, and then you're going to have to get this lens. So be looking at the $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 mark. So if you're excited about this, know what you're getting into.
Yeah, I think that the hardest part with a lot of the when you get out of Canon, PL, and B4, like those are the things. The number of lenses drops off really fast, and so that's really always the challenge that we have with that. I think that I've heard some of the rumors. I think that it would be it would be interesting to see if it's PTZ or whether it's just more like a micro cinema type, body, a small body, and the lens mount will mean a lot, as well as the price. When we don't know what the price is yet. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Greg Gibson again in Washington, D.C. Can you explain balanced versus unbalanced mics, as well as the pros and or cons of each?
Go ahead, Jason.
Sure. An audio cable, so unbalanced signals use two wires, signal and ground. The signal wire carries the audio, and the ground wire acts as a reference point for the hot signal. It also picks up just about anything that it even has a remote chance at coming near. It acts as an antenna. Balanced audio, on the other hand, has three signals: a hot signal, a cold signal, and a ground. In that case, the cold signal is the inverse of the hot signal and allows for noise canceling all the way along the way, and then the ground is just a straight negative. So the pros are less noise. In fact, there are no cons, I think, to balanced audio. And the cons are, well, yeah, you get the idea.
Good, Mitchell.
Yeah, no pros on unbalanced. There's just no upside to it. A balanced line deals with a thing called common mode rejection. And what that simply means is that the amount of interference or noise out there affects both of those lines, and then they're completely rejected because it's using the difference. So that's what they call common mode rejection. Sometimes the numbers are published, and the more common mode rejection you have, the quieter the microphone's going to be. But balanced is the way to go.
Good, Bill.
The only con that I can think of, and it's a small one, is that the cables for the traditional cables for balanced audio are relatively thick. So if you are running 8 signals, you can end up with a bundle of cables that's pretty substantial. They can't really make them smaller and smaller because they have to have an extremely good shielding system in there. The whole idea of a balanced cable needs that shield to be active to keep as much RF out of it as possible, and then the balance can do its trick of phase cancellation to keep noise suppressed in the run for the microphone. But I wish there was something where I wish you could use smaller diameter cables for bundle runs that you're trying to get pulled through something, but I've never seen them. The world is just awash in full-size balance cables. They're ridiculously inexpensive because they're a commodity compared to what they do, and so that's just the way it is. You have to deal with bundles of cables that are bigger with balanced.
I generally won't run a signal over unbalanced more than about 6 inches, and only when I'm pushed into a corner. So I think that, to be clear enough, and that's like I didn't have the only pro of unbalanced is you may have a device that only does unbalanced, and then you have to use it, but that's the only pro there. Everything else is con. It is it's not acceptable in production. Next question.
Eric Block is up next from Tel Aviv, Israel. In the market for a relatively less costly wide-angle camera. Needs to have an HDMI interface, but to be used only for the studio backshot. Any suggestions for such a camera?
Good guy.
Yeah, I really like that Huddle Cam model that has USB and HDMI because it comes with the remote control, which allows you to zoom in and zoom out. The remote control is just a little simple guy like this. But that's a pretty nice camera for what it is for under, I think it's $200, about $200, $199, somewhere in there.
Good, Bill.
If you're looking for something really inexpensive, you might look on the used sites for the earlier GoPros. The first, I think 2, maybe 3 had an HDMI out on them. They're extremely wide angle, but past that, they dropped the HDMI, so you won't get that out of it.
I think you can get all the way to 4.
Oh, to 4? Okay.
Yeah, I think that it was either 4 or 5. It might even be 5. I have to go back and look at. I have collections of GoPros laying around. I'd have to look at it because we used to use them for spherical, so we'd buy 6 at a time because we would use them for the old spherical solutions. And I can't remember where we lost the HDMI. The one that we've used the most has been the Blackmagic micro cinemas because. Now that's SDI and HDMI, and we use those because we can control the lenses. So we can have some of the power zooms. You can zoom in and out and check focus and all the other bits and pieces to it. So that's the one we use the most. Other than that, most of the work we did was GoPros. Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia. Are there any benefits of using interlaced video over progressive?
Jason.
Exactly one, and it really shouldn't matter. It uses about half the bits, but you're also recording half as much data. So not really.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Jason's exactly right. And then you also had to deal with the fact that if you were going to do production, you had to convert that by deinterlacing, and then you had to know which fields were predominant, which were not. I think that was the term. And the other thing is most of the networks still are doing interlaced video.
Yeah, the only advantage to interlace is the fact that you have to deliver it to many networks because it's a legacy format that would be very expensive for them to take out everything in their system to replace. And the problem really that broadcast has is it's on kind of a shrinking island. So they don't have more money to go throw into a new system. And this would cost billions of dollars that they don't have to make the pivot. And so interlace is still with us mostly because of broadcasters. No one else uses it. And because it's a horrible format. What happens now with deinterlacing typically is our scalers got so good that we learned to just throw away one of the fields. So if you have a 5994i, 1080i, what that is, it's 2997 in one field and 2997 in the other field. And so what they found was actually more efficient, which is throw one field away and scale the other one up. The scalers work better that way. And so you're really getting a 960 by like a, kind of a weird 960 by 540. Essentially, it's not technically that. It's actually 540 by 1920 is the image that you're getting out of that field, and then you scale that up vertically, and so it's slightly sharper than 960 by 540, but not that much. And the first ones to do that with, I think, were Apple. Actually, I think that you'd notice if you took your handy cam and you recorded something and you said de-interlace, it would automatically create a 960 by 540 file for you. It's funny how that works, and it looked nice and sharp. Bill?
Yeah, there is one other little tiny thing, but it's so niche that it's hard. You do get more temporal resolution, which is to say in interlace, it scans the even field, then it goes back and scans the odd field, but it takes a little bit of micro time to do that. So in the odd circumstance, you were trying to do something like seeing who crossed a finish line first, having a little bit of extra temporal resolution, faster captures of those frames may help you a tiny bit, but I agree with everybody that it's really, interlace is the past. And you get half the resolution to get that extra time.
Well, and you can just record 5994p.
Yeah, you can pump up the resolution, but if you're stuck, you're right. Then that's why I'm kind of hedging.
Yeah, exactly. You can always, and nowadays, I mean, our phones are doing 240, and so and 120. I mean, I think that it's going to be really interesting over the next little bit of time to see what happens with frame rates, because I do think that in many avenues, we're going to start to see higher and higher frame rates because our TVs are able to handle it. Almost all of our devices are able to handle it. Many cameras are able to handle it. When you see all of those things converging together, you see disruption that is just waiting to happen. And I think that, again, filmmaking will probably stay with 2398 for a variety of reasons, or 24. But I think that when we look at home videos, as well as sports, live events, all of those things are going to want to go to 120 frames a second because almost every device supports those things, and they actually look much more visceral and much more real. Filmmaking is great to leave it at 2398. It tells us we're watching a film. It's quote unquote cinematic. But I think that almost everything else will go to 120 over the next 5 to 10 years. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, up next. What advantage does commercial fiber have over residential? And explain why residential offers much faster speeds, gigabits versus 30 megabit signals, for a much lower price, assuming uptime isn't a major factor.
Eric?
All right. Well, so this has been a question in After Hours that Paul and I have discussed, but essentially the difference between what we in the industry call dedicated internet versus something that is shared. A shared internet could be your Comcast signal. It also could be what's called GPON services. And the difference is that it's like flying standby on an airplane. You could get on the airplane if there's enough room. If there's not enough room, then you'll have to wait. Whereas dedicated is you have a ticket with a seat assigned and you're getting on and you're flying. That is the very big difference between those two. So you pay more for the one that's dedicated because it's a guaranteed service. So what I would suggest, by the way, those speeds are really marketing. So when they say you get 1 gigabit at your house and you do a speed test and you get a gigabit, that's fantastic. But what you probably don't know is that at the end of that internet signal, where it goes back into the core of the network, that's probably maxing out at about 2 gigabit for everybody in the neighborhood. There could be 200 or 300 people that are all sharing that 2 gigabit. So if everybody was doing it all at once, nobody would get a good signal. So just understand that I think what you're probably dealing with in the industry is something that is about marketing more than it is actually about speed. Now, generally, if it works for you, you'll find it works really well.
And a great example of shared internet is Spectrum. Anyway, so
yes.
Nigel. Oh my gosh, Nigel.
Yeah, good answer. The only two things to add on to that are the commercial or the business will probably have SLAs against it, service level agreements, so you can, theoretically guarantee that. And the third thing is when you have a business account, they pretend to care more.
Pretend.
Better question. Actors.
Yeah, exactly. They have more emphasis on, oh, we're really sorry you don't have internet. When you have commercial, they're like, yeah, sorry, you don't have internet. But when it's a business, they're like, I'm really sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Santa Bart Gaffney in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin says, infighting over the center square. Shades of Hollywood squares. We all want to be Paul Lind. Sorry.
Mitchell?
Yeah, I want to be Paul Lind, and I just want to monetize it. Maybe there's a favor I could do for the back-end crew or something, but I'd like to switch positions with Pareto, if that's possible.
Who cares, Mitch?
I'm not even conscious to it. I'm not even conscious to what it is because we just have this view. So I guess, okay.
All right, stick Jason down in the lower left corner.
All right,
I'll take it all day. No problem.
All right. This is funny. All right. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes this. In NASA and other countdowns, the autosequencer is often mentioned, software that executes events, some with conditions locked to a time base and displays a UI. Would Isadora or QLab be the equivalent in our world, and would there be any others?
There's lots of things that do that. I mean, time code is used for all kinds of activations. And so it's hard to even limit it to Isadora and QLab. There are, time code is that, lots of things can be set up to be, whether it's a lighting board, whether it's a set of, there's all kinds of Q systems that will, work inside of time code. Go ahead, Jason.
I mean, the one that comes to mind comes from Disney World. Like, the Disney parades that you see are all locked to LTC. Absolutely all of it. I've been behind one of the control panels and watched this happen, and it's truly like the most rehearsed thing there is.
And I don't know if it's still the case, but like, for instance, even just fireworks, the fireworks displays that I worked on were all time code based, so the time code goes, and that way the music lines up with all of the stuff. When we do motion capture, we use time code to tie the music. If we're doing a concert or something in motion capture, tie the music back to the mocap. It's ubiquitous. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says the Panasonic DCBS1H full-frame cinema camera shooter's kit, I think that's their box camera kind of thing, is on sale for a $500 discount? I'm doing traveling shows in November, daily setup and teardown, and move to a new city. Besides this one, what would you suggest for fast setups?
I probably wouldn't buy anything. If I had something in November, I probably wouldn't buy anything before IBC. I think that would be the safe thing to say. There's usually a lot of movement, and you also have the NAB fall coming up. So there's a lot of movement that will happen in the fall. I'm not sure if I would, especially when you start seeing sales right before IBC. That's oftentimes a reactionary thing. I think that when you're looking at doing fast teardowns and setups, it's a lot of how to build the system as a kit and to build a case that will hold it as a kit, so that you have less stuff that you have to put together when you put it up. Now, of course, this is where ENG cameras come in. Really, this is where you want to have something like an ENG camera that has all those things just built in. You have a lens, you have you open it up and it shoots. So it just depends on what you have to actually get done there. But if you have something more complex, if you're looking at if you're looking at this, a cinema camera, typically those are a kit with all kinds of wires and bits and pieces. The question is, how much of it can you keep together and safely and carefully put into something that you can carry with you? Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, with the Blackmagic Design ATEM streaming bridge, can you stream from the ATEM Mini on a front stage to the back of the house at high enough quality, low enough latency for the in-room projection to work well, or is the delay too high?
Go ahead, Jason.
As long as you're running a straight Ethernet cable and you have a dedicated encoder, which to me throws away the ATEM Mini, but it's just me. Absolutely, I've done it before, and it works wonderfully.
And I'll disagree. So we do everything we can to reduce that latency to as close to zero as possible. The real problem that we have is the video falls behind the audio through a variety of devices. We have to have everything gen locked. So for the kind of stuff that we're doing where we have a display, even the extra frame that it takes for it to be resynced is something we try to avoid. So you're going to lose a couple frames going back. Could you get away with it in a smaller event? Probably. In larger events, you will definitely see it on the screen, and it will. I mean, you can't. The problem really is we can delay audio all the time when we're streaming because you don't see it. But if you're sitting in the room, we can't slow the audio down, and so every frame is something you can't get back from an in-room experience. And so I think it would kind of work, but I don't think it would. Definitely, we're looking at trying to minimize the number of devices it goes through, trying to gen lock everything that's going to provide something to a screen. So that's what I would say there. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, and he says, what's the similarity and difference between office hours and the Capital Factory and or WeWork, which is coworking, incubator, accelerator, VC funder, and event organizer?
I guess I would say that we're virtual and we're not charging anything. Go ahead, Nigel.
Money. Many of the things that you've talked about there require you to pay to play, or are about finding resources and funding, and that's not what we're doing here at this point.
Fair enough. We're going into the next question. No, I'm sorry. Nigel just spoke. Jason Bache is down there at the bottom. I wasn't looking in the right place. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I would add to that after watching, what was it, the Apple TV documentary or the scripted fiction on on WeWork, that it's not, we're not run by profiteering egomaniac despots. So, there's also that.
Well, that's 4.0. We'll find somebody to come in and do that. Let's go to the next question.
Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. Can the panel take another look at the alltop.com, which got kind of brushed aside the other day in the Tech News Service source question?
And Jason's going to weigh in on this.
It's a nice aggregator. I mean, my problem with it is is the same with all aggregators. What I actually want is more bespoke and not just more text on a page. Combining headlines is easy. Concatenating feeds is easy. The way I've done this is with either news groups or my Twitter feed, which is extremely filtered and kind of combed down to eliminate specific junk that I simply don't want. So it's nice for what it is, and I would take Reddit and custom Twitter over it all day. It's no offense to it. It's just how I am.
Interesting. Nigel?
Yeah, I'm going to +1 on the custom Twitter. I have spent a lot of time making sure my Twitter feeds and lists are designed to help me. I get very concerned about curated sites like this unless I understand who's doing what and how automated is it and what editorial process is there on top of it. Because I get suspicious about all of these sorts of sites that look automated that aren't. So finding Twitter, building lists, really driving the things you want to, and then go to the base websites and read the stories.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it drives me nuts. I find myself looking up, something catches my eye, a topic. I do one search on it, and the next day, certain feeds of mine, Facebook, hello, are just awash in stuff. Obviously, some bot was watching what I clicked on, and one click is enough to infect my feed with stuff that was a momentary side glance, not I want this in my life constantly. Drives me nuts. So I agree with honestly, with what Nigel said entirely. I'm tired of people curating for me, and I want to do my own curation whenever possible because it's just gotten out of hand. Next question.
Next question coming in from Douglas Carmichael. A NASA document compares the flight control computer on the SLS rocket to an original Mac PowerBook G3, but with a much more sophisticated OS. Why would they use a PowerBook as their comparison versus another product?
Jason, take it away.
If I were to guess, it's because it's a proprietary chip that nobody, still living understands, and and it's been pounded on, to the nines. That's just how it is.
You get those comparisons occasionally, like the original Geminis were sent up with, 1/50th the power in an Apple Watch now. And so I think people love making these kind of comparisons to it just doesn't have as much power as you think it does. Or in the early days, we had nothing and now we've got everything. It's just interesting, but interesting. Let's move on to the next question.
Paul Valhus from Austin, Texas. Guy, is there a larger quad monitor with the same features as the LG, for example, the 55 and 65 inch? How do you feel about the LG interface?
Guy Cochran.
Yeah, I haven't been in the market lately for a newer model. So the one that I currently have, which I believe is the same one that you have, is the LG 43 inch. And Jeff Keithley first turned us onto these things. And I mean, they're pretty cool. You can divide up, your screen into 4 quadrants. I have a PC that spans these two. I have another PC that I just added here, and usually my Mac's there, but because I had to add this Rodecaster, I moved my Mac over to there. But using Synergy, I can scroll between all these monitors. In fact, I just added another one right over there in between these two that you can't really see. But yeah, the interface is pretty slick with the remote control. You can take any of the monitors full screen. So if I wanted to take this vMix full screen, I could just hit input. I think it's a great monitor for the price. I think they're still around $600. So I don't see anything else in the market that's beating this at the moment. So I'd highly suggest them because it saves a lot of real estate instead of having 4 separate monitors.
Very cool. Jason.
+1 on the 43 inch. I ended up asking Guy where to find one of these. Got one myself. You forgot to tell the guy about the beautiful hack that is if you get what was the name? We both had one, but you can basically just use RF. You can learn the RF and basically make macros from it. I am blanking on the controller name, but it works. There it is. He's got it in his hand, folks.
The global
Yes.
cache. Yeah, this is an IP to 3 in or out IR blaster. So you could learn all the commands, and then you could set them to be IP so you could control the thing from anywhere or even through a Zoom room.
Yep.
The next question, next question.
All right, it comes again from Paul Valhus. I'm not sure how to answer this, but Mitchell, what advice do you give budding stand-up comics?
Sorry, but we couldn't avoid it. There it is. And we're going to let Mitchell respond in kind. It's teasing
I think
time.
if any question had an opportunity to be bounced, that would be the question to bounce from the list. But anyhow, it so happens that Paul's son has been doing stand-up comedy, and he's a budding professional in that area. And I think I am not a stand-up comedian, by the way. I'm not really a comedian. I'm just a funny guy.
Of course not. You're sitting down.
Okay.
Couldn't resist.
See, that's
Where's
the kind of humor
soundboard?
That's the kind of humor.
I needed
that's
a
the kind of
rim
humor
shot.
you don't want to use, by the way, to Paul's son. But anyhow, it's a lot harder than it seems because you have to work up a routine and you have to practice it over and over and over again. And I thought I could nail it. I did it one time at the Comedy Cabaret down here in Wilmington when I was on the radio, and I was miserable. I was just horrible at it because, you just think to expect one thing, and then if you don't make a connection with the audience, you are in deep trouble. So my advice, practice, keep working on your routine, refine it and refine it and refine it until it gets better. I'm not sure why this question's here, but I'm doing my best to answer.
Well, maybe they thought I was reading earlier, so anyway, let's move on to the next question. Before we do the actual switch, I'm going to say that we're running a little bit light on questions. So if you want to get something answered before we go to the second hour topic, this is a good time to get some of your thoughts out to the wider office hours audience. And now let's go ahead, Mitch.
All right, it's from Douglas Carmichael. CBS Sports worked with a group, Exceptional Minds, to employ those on the spectrum in media management roles. If you combine a PXC-like group with a traditional supported residential independent living community, could it create positive outcomes?
No one has clicked in, and this is. I think there are more and more opportunities. I've been watching. I don't know why I got hooked on it. I wanted to see what was coming out of the Korean video factories. K-pop has been such a huge deal, and I know they have a giant infrastructure. So on one of the services, and I think it may be HBO Max, but it might be Netflix. There's a show called I think it's Woo Young Woo, and it stars someone who is, I don't know if she is actually on the spectrum or she is portraying someone, but it is a show full of heart and capability. And the third episode or fourth episode, I think, was really interesting in that it contrasted her as an attorney, and she actually is extremely high functioning. And they had another character come in who was far less capable on the spectrum. And it was fascinating to see two different views. I had never had that before of characters who are on the autism spectrum, but operated entirely differently. I thought that was really helpful for me as a layperson who doesn't deal with this very much to understand the tremendous divergence of capabilities of people all across that. So it was good for me to see, and we're starting to see that. That particular thing came out of Korea, so it's a global phenomenon, and I celebrate the fact that we're getting to see more diversity even inside of something like that. Jason, you want to make some points?
Well, no, actually, I just had to bite here, but you may have answered my question with context. A PXC-like group, are you referring to K-pop specifically? That was the second time Douglas said PXC-like, and I was completely lost on what that meant.
Okay. And it may be not that. I just happened to see that 2 days ago and thought, wow, that's interesting. I saw a piece of entertainment concept, and it's a fine show, beautifully produced, and they address this in a mass audience thing. So I guess the information, the acceptance, all that is getting more platforms than I ever saw.
The chat's correcting me. PXC is pixel core shorthand.
Okay. There you go. Fair enough. And Harshi wants to get in on this.
Yeah, so with the regards to just having independence and having that residential aspect, I'm vision impaired, and having that independence and living on your own is quite significant. So, you have your responsibilities of common household tasks, but then it's also the connections that you make within your community. So I wouldn't mind living, within a community that might have, different enablements or abilities, as I would call them. In that sense that we all are kind of human at the end of the day when we all chalk it down. And what can we bring to the table, or how can we get help from each other? The strengths and weaknesses are kind of found out between interactions. And I would say office hours and after hours is a great example of that. So, the residential thing, living on your own, I think is definitely a great thing. And hopefully that answers your question.
Fair enough. Let's move on to the next one.
Next question in from Eric Nathan from Bellingham, Washington, and on the panel. Tell us your stories about building a great marketing campaign for your productions or customers.
And let's see, Mitch Hill's going to start us off there.
Oh boy, you guys are in trouble now. I used to do creative working with my partners in an ad agency, and one of the ad campaigns I had to develop was for a law firm. And the idea was that they were an injury type law firm, that accidents happen. So I tried to create a billboard campaign that was separated by 2 weeks. I'll show it to you. Please understand that it was all done in fun. Here it is. The top part ran for about 2 weeks, and it was just a nice ad about summers are better in Delaware. But 2 weeks later, I made it look like the billboard had been replaced, and there was a mistake that happened there. And of course, it's just sort of a strange juxtaposition of the attorneys, and the idea is that accidents happen. I got more response, positive response from this ad campaign, because they thought it was a great way to demonstrate that things happen, and it's funny. So there's an example of what I thought was a pretty creative marketing campaign that worked fun for us.
And nobody else has weighed in on this. The advertising, the marketing industries have been going for decades upon decades, centuries actually, probably, if you think about some of the signs they find in Pompeii and things like that. But it is an art and a science, and it feeds on both. Having worked in it a little bit in my youth, it's really easy to think that you can do that kind of thing because we all consume tons of it, and I can't tell you how many commercials I have seen where I go, I can do better than that. But when you actually are in a position where you have to do better than that, you realize how many competing voices you're hearing, how much research is getting thrown at you, and the weight of the fact that decisions you make can end up being financially very dangerous. And the reason I say that is because one of the first concepts I learned in advertising when I was studying it was that of the inverted pyramid. The creative on any kind of like a TV commercial costs this much. The money spent to broadcast that out to a mass audience is the top of that inverted pyramid. So you may be risking, in the case of a McDonald's, hundreds of millions of dollars broadcasting out a message. And it may be that the budget for that ad was $1 million, but the risk of failure isn't the million at the bottom, it's the hundreds of millions at the top. And because of that, it is a very structured industry. And there's tons of testing and there's tons of audience polling. And it's just the risk can be at the top end huge. And it's also why you get so much work that kind of is derivative at the bottom, because once something proves to work, it's like, we'll run it forever. In where I used to live in Phoenix, there was an old ad where, I think for Discount Tire, where I think it was just a person in old lady makeup comes in and throws the tire through the window of the shop and says, if you're unhappy with our products, return it. I think that thing ran for 35 years unchanged. And I kept asking, gosh, I've been seeing this forever growing up here. Why is it still running? And the answer is because it was still working. And they didn't care about anything other than, if we run the ad, do sales go up? End of story. And they don't care about changing one thing in the creative, because it's designed to do that, to increase sales. And if it does it, you've won. Leave it alone. Move on. Nigel, you had some thoughts?
I was just going to say, you were talking about the downside of the campaigns, and occasionally we suggest television programs. And if you haven't seen, I think it's called McMillions, the series about the McDonald's monopoly campaign and or marketing campaign that went wrong and got corrupted. It's well worth watching if you want to see how the when your marketing is great and goes entirely wrong.
Yeah, it's a fascinating business. I enjoyed my time in it because it really challenged me every single day. Eric Nathan has thoughts.
The reason I asked that is because I think it's important in the production realm to make sure you understand how to talk about your production, how to sell the idea of your production. And I think it's easy for us to think about large campaigns as marketing, but there are very small things you can do, whether it's going on a local radio station, putting up flyers. Those are small things that are marketing campaigns that can actually turn very significantly important for your production. And so Absolutely. I was just going to recommend for the folks who are building productions that are small, don't forget to market. Don't forget to use email. Don't spam people. But don't forget to use the tools that are available to you. And I think that is something to always remember as we are producers.
Yeah, every company that you know about at some point had to face up to the marketing challenges. They were growing from being small to large. And the ones who started out with decent financing always had marketing, advertising, and the rest of those things as part of their business plan from day one. Because without that, you can have the best product in the world. And if nobody knows it's there, it doesn't do you any good. Let's move on to the next question.
Next question in from Roscoe Jones in Brea, California. What determines the upload speeds of Starlink? Could it be used for remote production uplinks?
And Eric Nathan has thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So Starlink's bandwidth is determined by a number of factors, but most importantly, it's the number of satellites overhead. So if you're in a remote location, I think there's probably some folks from the OH Space campaign that I think would be really useful to learn from, because they used it. But just to understand that the bandwidth is relative to how many satellites are overhead. As Starlink launches more satellites, there will be gaps that will be filled in. But from time to time, there's going to be gaps because those satellites are they're rotating above you, right? And they're handing your signal off from satellite to satellite. Well, if there's ever a moment where it breaks that gap, or you can't receive the signal clearly from the satellite, you're not going to have the kind of connectivity that you really want. So some people I've heard, they'll struggle with that. But I think for the most part, it's solved a lot of problems.
Understood. Fair enough. Let's move on to the next question.
J.J. McKenna from Santa Venetia, California. What is your favorite tool for getting rid of spam from marketing campaigns?
Jason Bass is going to start us off.
Okay, this has a twofold approach. The first is, how to prevent future spam, and the second is how to mop up all the junk that you already have. Easiest way to get rid of spam in the future is to use the plus operator. Of course, there are things like hide my email, and if you're on a PC, Firefox will do the same thing. It will obfuscate your email address and give you one-time burner email addresses that will let one thing through and then allow you to just rapidly stop any further communications. But That only works if you're not. That only works if they don't already have your email address. If they do, I found that paid Gmail is spectacular at this. A combination of a few rules, a few keyword indicators, and just the smallest amount from the header information will absolutely knock this out.
Eric Nathan.
Yeah, I was going to say, paid email is absolutely fantastic, whether it's Office 365 or Gmail. But I actually think that in the free Gmail, there's another alternative that you can use. And that's that I don't think most people know, but the period, if you in a Gmail address in the front end, doesn't actually matter. You can take it out, you can put it back. It will still get to you. And so what you can actually do is move that period between different letters. And so I started doing that when I heard about it. I thought, well, that seems like an interesting idea. And then use that email address. And then what's really interesting is that in Gmail, you can filter that. You can filter it right into the trash. So you can say that anyone who sends to that email address with the period between the first and the second letter goes into the trash, or and who sells your email address as well. I've also started using the Apple Hide My Email, as Jason mentioned. One email address per website, and you'll figure out immediately who's spamming you and who's selling your information.
It is such a cool thing to have this show here where I can learn so much that I didn't know before because I hadn't paid much attention to that. So thank you both, and let's move on to the next question.
Jeff C. of Jeff C. Does Voiceovers, Miami Beach, Florida. That's a commercial, isn't it? Anyhow, has anyone had clients use or express interest in using AI voice services instead of humans to create any audio-video content as a voiceover that's a looming battle as the AI gets better?
Jason's going to start us off.
I've had budget-constrained clients express interest until they've heard it, and they've immediately become mortified and happily ponied up for talent.
Mitchell?
Look, I'm a voiceover guy. I'm not the least bit worried about it because there's so many nuances to reading copy, and I'm sure Bill could weigh in on it, that an AI just can't do. It's very subtle, but you just notice it. It's like CGI-generated people. They just don't look right, and in this case, they just don't sound right. So it's going to have to go a long way to catch up with real thing.
Nigel?
I know that when I am watching a YouTube video and it's clearly an automated reader, I just turn it off. Now, it may be a generational thing, so we may need to watch for a different generation not being so sensitive to that because they get more used to it and they run it at a faster speed. But I would be very sensitive to using it in a commercial advertising or marketing thing because of the nature of turning off the audience.
Hershey?
I'm going to take it a little bit differently here. I'm going to take it at audio description side of things. Amazon has also started doing AI audio description recently, but the human actually just possesses a little bit more inflections, I think, in the speech. So to voiceover work, or when you're listening to the telephone and the message on an IVR, it's similar to that. So I think humans still fill that gap for certain people. But as you said, it is getting better with AI, and Amazon is probably one of the best companies to represent that because they have a system where you get to tweak it the way you want it, and you could have it huff and puff and have your attacks and everything else. So it is getting a little scary, but I think the process of a human speaking, the inflections, the breath, the what have you, it still feels better from a human's perspective.
It's an interesting subject, and it's talked about a lot on the voiceover gathering places on the internet, and I'm in a few of them. There's obviously some concern as AI continues to improve that will it ever get to the point where it's realistic? I come at it from a slightly different perspective, and that's every kind of voiceover has its own nuances. I agree with Mitch in that respect. Some things AI voices can do pretty well. Some things they're very bad at. And as my exemplar, I use the fact that I listen to a lot of books on tape, particularly novels and things like that. I'm out exercise walking. I want to hear a good story. So I tend to buy a lot of that off of Audible. And when I'm in there, I was surprised. The books that are narrated by multiple casts do not charm me as much as the books who are narrated by a singular, extremely talented narrator who was able to move their voice into this tonality is this character and this pacing is that character, and a good artist doing that, and there's some great ones out there, can do a fabulous job. I've done a lot of voiceover. I've probably done over 1,000 paid gigs in my career in voiceover. I can't do that work. I just don't, that is not who I am as a performer. Those people have a skill set that I never have. So when you're coding something to read, how long is it going to take to get to the coding of that kind of nuance in performance? And to me, it seems like it's going to be 100 years or more. Maybe at some point they'll have a way to capture what that brilliant narrator who brings art to the science of stringing words together can do. But I'm not going to hold my breath about that. And I think there's going to be a generation or two where human voices still can provide a connection and an authenticity for these kind of storytelling moments that the AI just can't do. I think there's a place for both. If I was doing some sort of manual or something like that, and I just needed the words out accurately, there may be a place for that. And maybe it doesn't matter that it's perfectly intonated in every end of every line. They just want the information and they're going to run it at 4x and get the data they need. Yeah, maybe that's okay for AI. But I still think the universe of voiceover services is big and constantly expanding, and I'm not worried about it anywhere in the short term, probably in my lifetime and maybe my son's lifetime. Who knows? Next question.
David Brady, New York, New York. Zoom rooms, when using the people count feature and enabling Zoom's native method, where are those metrics displayed or reported? Can it be used to see if a room is occupied, or is it strictly for the end of meeting metrics?
And I can tell I went way too long with that answer because we now have about 4 minutes and we've got more than we need questions. So quick as possible, Guy.
Yeah, if you have a specific device, like some of the Hudley devices, you can see that the real-time people count will be on the scheduling displays. So like the Hudley IQ, Neat, Poly, Aver. And then also that information is stored in Windows, face count, app data, Zoom rooms, logs, face count, blah, blah. I'll put the link in chat.
I'm sorry I had to cut Guy off with my timing mistake, but because if you come back and ask that question again and do it when Guy's on the panel, I know Guy knows a ton about this and can really help you more deeply than that. Next question, real quick again.
Danny Law in Malaysia, is there a trick to getting NDI encoders to be picked up over VLAN?
And Jason.
Yeah, I'll do it quickly. Check your subnetting. If it can't see 127.0.0.1, you're not going to see it.
And next question.
Paul Vallis from Austin, Texas. Guy and Jason, can you dive deeper into the global cache IP2IR ITAC TCP IP to IR converter?
It seems like this is not a deep dive quickly. Well, let's see if you can come close, Guy.
Yeah, basically it's just a little device that has Ethernet, and then it has these 3 mini plug ports, and then I can't get to the wiring right now, but basically those little ports are IR blasters. So there's 2 outs, or I think they're configurable. I have mine set to 1 in, so I could take a remote control and I could push a button with the app open on the PC. It'll put up a hexadecimal code of what that was. Like, let's say mine is recall preset position 1. It'll give me that code. I could then assign that code to a button somewhere else, like on a Stream Deck. But basically, this is the IP to IR device. So it converts IP, the internet, over to IR, and you could learn. And there's also 200,000 devices that you could control. The library is in the Mukana link I put up earlier. So you don't have to program these things by hand and do the hexadecimal thing unless that is not in there. So like if you have like a Denon receiver and you want to switch from input 1 to input 2, that's probably a common enough device that it's in the library. So you can just get one of these for $109 off Amazon or your favorite store, and you can use it like that.
So I got a question for you, guys. We're talking through this. If I had a couple of these devices and I created a VPN, let's say a Wi-Fi back to Ethernet, and took them to an airport, I could coordinate all the TVs, right?
All day, Alex. All day.
You just got to make sure that the blaster is within a few number of feet. Like
that's what I'm saying.
Like a regular remote control.
Create a Wi-Fi network, have Wi-Fi go back to it. You have little packs so you could just lay out there, so you could turn the TVs and start creating your own little dance. Just saying.
Yeah, here's what one of the little blasters look like. So it's just a little tiny thing, but that sprays infrared. So if you were to look at this with like IR goggles or something like that, you could see it spraying out.
I ordered one because my server room is where all my AV equipment sits, and we had something that kind of passed it through. But I was like, this is amazing. Like if I can just do this with Ethernet,
Well, and the thing is, if you have a Zoom room, you can set up very easily JSON commands that'll give you little icons. So if you're in Zoom, you can actually say turn on the air conditioning or turn the fan down, and there's already pre-built icons for that. So this is the device that bridges those. So you don't even have to use a VPN if you're already using a Zoom room.
Yeah, and you can stack them, and the library is deep. Like a lot of what you're paying for specifically with this one is like the database that is just bottomless.
That's great.
Alex, it's the top of the hour, so I don't know if you want to move on or do you want to finish this up?
We can go a little over to make that work. Do you want me to? Do you want to keep?
Yeah,
running?
you grab the helm and I'll read.
I'll grab it. I don't think that my Alpha channel thing will take a whole hour, so we don't see a lot of questions yet. So we'll go ahead and go through this. Go ahead.
So Santa Bart Gaffney has the next one from Economawak. I took a leap and came back over to the dark side. What's the affordable but good monitor for my Ultra studio? I'll be editing and rendering in 3D as well as virtual visits with ATEM Extreme and Stream Deck.
Go ahead, Eric.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know about affordable, but welcome to Apple. Thank you very much for going that direction. But I'll just say, I think there are two displays. You can get the Studio Display or the Pro Display XDR. Those are excellent monitors with your new Apple.
Next question.
Harshi Trivedi and Daytona Beach are on the panel. Wow, it's already Wednesday. Forgot to ask this yesterday on the Audio Focus. What mic would you suggest under the $100 US mark then can potentially connect to an iPhone? So USB basically.
Under $100. I think that there may be an option with Saramonic that can that have some small mics. I think if you go to $100 to $200, Rode has some microphones that also will connect directly to your phone. I think they're in the like 150 range or 170 range. But I think under $100, I'm not sure of how many there are, but definitely between 100 and 200, there's a pretty crowded range between Saramonic and Rode and a couple other vendors. Go ahead. Next question.
Next question. Douglas Carmichael's up. When recording voiceover content, would the choice of a preamp be just as important as the choice of a mic for the specific voice? I know that the SM7 has been used in the past for some voices.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, absolutely. Any type of channel processor, mic, preamp, EQ, compression, they all add character, and you have to determine how much you want. I went crazy and told the guys at Sweetwater, I said, I don't care what it costs. What is the best processor I should use with an EQ and preamp with a U87 for my voice? And they recommended a Neve 8801, which was very pricey, but it was worth it.
Yeah, for me, usually when I'm doing it, and Bill may outline this, is transparency. Like, when I'm doing a radio show, I want it to have effects and I want it to feel a certain way. When I'm doing a voiceover, I usually want it to be just as quiet and clean as it possibly can be, because all those effects can be added later. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, this is a toughie for me because it is important, but how important is it? And I just remember back to my early career when I go studio to studio to studio, I'd use a different microphone, different preamp, different chain every time, and they all ended up on the air and they all work. I've also had to record in closets when I've been out of town and I had to do an insert for a client, and I've used something simple like my Zoom H4n. Is it as transparent? No, but did it work and get on the air and do fine? Yes. So it's a tough thing. There is a difference, but you have to know when that difference is important versus something you'd like to have.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. What do you want the most in the upcoming iPhone 14? What will be the max phone cost?
Ooh, Paul, he is near a record negative count there, -8 for this one. So we won't spend too much time on it. I have the record. I think I had like -16 on something. And I don't know what I said, but anyway, I think the higher resolution is what a lot of people are looking for, and more low light sensitivity. Most of the focus is on the camera. And I think the max phone cost will be between $2,400 and $2,600. And I think my wife likes the fact that I get a lot of the most expensive ones, because then she gets next year. so I'm handing off my 13 as I buy the 14. I've already saved up. I've got $2,500 in the bank. I'm not going to spend any more than that on a camera. A phone. A camera with a phone. Anyway, next question.
Next one from Douglas Carmichael. In an article about an electronic artist tour, they mentioned that there were no transit vans used and all equipment fit in a few flight cases. From what I know, the transit vans started in the UK European market. Have they become popular abroad?
We have a lot of them. I used to have a lot of them. I don't have them now, but they're great. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, would it be worth waiting for the M2 Pro Max MacBook Pros, or would there still be a lot of mileage in the M1 Pro or Max?
Oh, I think you'd get a lot out of anything that you got there. So I think that you're definitely going to get mileage out of both of them. But if I didn't need it right now, I probably wouldn't upgrade until the next version. So, you should never not get something that you need because there's another upgrade coming. But you should never buy faster than you need to. So those are the two things that weigh against you. As soon as you know that you actually need it to do something, then upgrade. But until then, try to hang out, and because every upgrade is going to improve it, you're going to get more bang for your buck. All right, I'm going to jump into the second hour and talk about alpha channels. And so one of the things that I want to do, and we'll answer questions if you have them about alpha channels. But I thought that it'd be useful. It's kind of a real basic thing that I find that a lot of people don't fully understand what's actually happening. So I wanted to show a very simple example, and we can talk a little bit about it. And once you understand it, what you can do with it, and I'll show a couple examples there and answer your questions. And if you don't have a lot of questions, then it'll be a really short trip. So anyway, so if you have questions about alpha channels, you can throw them in. So I'm going to grab an example here. Let's see here. This is an example that we actually had from WWDC. So this was, here you can see this. Now, we're stacked on top of each other, Renee, Justine, and I, and that, of course, is because we have alpha channels. And so what's happening here is, of course, each one of these was taken on their own. They came in as ping files, and those ping files had, had transparency, and you can see them, over here, down here at the bottom. Now, what I want to do, though, is that what makes alpha channels so mysterious is that most of these applications do a lot of things for us automatically. So they go, okay, well, I'm just going to create transparency. But what's actually happening there is this layer has an alpha channel embedded into it. So you want to kind of break out understanding that everything that has transparency in anything that you're doing in computer graphics, so whether it's stills, whether it's video, whether it's computer graphics, anything that's going over top of something else has got an alpha channel somewhere in it. And so the alpha channel basically is this. If we turn these off and we go into here, let me just turn this off here. We'll just have a gradient here. And that's an alpha channel. So this alpha channel in this case is, we're starting pretty simple here, but this is black and white. And, this area here, of course, is what I want to keep. And this is what's going to be transparent. Now, the big thing is that white, typically, and this can be sometimes managed differently, but white tends to be this is the matte of what you're keeping. And this is the matte. And this has been around, since film. This is nothing's really changed here. That's why we still call it mattes. But the main thing here is that how do we use this? How is the alpha channel actually calculated? Because it's actually very simple math that's actually used to make this happen. So let me show you what the math is, because some of the things will make more sense when we see that. So if I take the first thing I do is I invert that alpha channel. See here, and I am going to multiply this channel to the background, and so what I'm going to do, so if we take this and I just simply set to multiply, and that knocks it out. So that's a knockout. It basically, by multiplying, so when you think about what is a pre-multiplied alpha channel, when it says pre-multiplied, it means I already multiplied what I had to the background. So why does it knock out a hole? It's because you don't want to think about, this is the thing that was really for me when I was getting started that really changed the way I approached a lot of these things, is that you don't want to think about the whole image. So it's easy for us to think about the entire image. Well, how do you multiply an image? Think of it as a pixel. So one pixel, there's in this case, I think 1920 by 1080, or it might be slightly different in this image, but you have thousands of pixels this way, thousands of pixels or hundreds of pixels this way. But you want to think about everything as an individual pixel, because that's how pixel math works. It says, I'm doing the math on this pixel to this pixel, and then I'm going to do it all the way across over and over again. And when you think about that, how an alpha channel works is that black is 0 and white is 1. So that's actually what's actually happening here. Now, what that means is that if something's black, you're multiplying 0 to, when you multiply, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to fix something here real quick here. Let me turn this off. Just give me 1 second here. It's going to drive me crazy. Just give me 1 second. I know that I am now trying to figure out. Now I'm going to do this. So you're going to see a flash of green. You see the behind the scenes here for a second, because there's this little bug. You wonder why I don't. Oh, sorry. Hold on. It's very complicated. I'm trying to explain what happened here. Sorry, we had this bug, and I saw it a little earlier, and I didn't get to it, and I don't have my mouse hooked up but my selector is connected to my keyboard, and then I just lost the. Oh.
Perhaps while Alex is working,
yeah, you guys
on that,
talk for a second. I got a technical issue. I'm trying
talk a little bit about what alpha channels are called, or when you refer to them. You already said alpha channel. MAT is what people refer to, particularly in the film industry. I've worked in facilities where they called them Hycons, because I guess they're referring to a bright white cookie cutter alpha channel, but was combined in a switcher to allow the cutout to work. The other thing that was complicated for me in the beginning when I was dealing with alpha channels was getting into my head what a pre-multiplied part of the alpha channel is. It's sort of counterintuitive when you first talk about it, but when you really understand it, then it begins to make a whole lot more sense. And then the other things that playing around with, if you get into the details, when you saw the figure that Alex had up there. If you looked in the glasses, that wasn't 100% white. So you have the opacity that you can go up to 250 points, 255 points between white, which is completely cut out, and then any percentage of that number all the way up to 255. So,
Mitch, to follow along with that, what the thing that surprised me is when I learned that there were 255 levels of R for red, 255 levels for green, for 255 levels for blue, that they could be all mixed together. But then alpha channel adds 256 levels of transparency possible. So it was that extra 256 potential signal descriptors that determine how much transparency a key image could have. That helped me.
Thanks, guys. So I had a cascading failure there. There was one thing that needed to get fixed, and when I hit it, it broke a bunch of other things all at the same time. So I think I'm good to go now. But if you wonder why I'm not letting people use my telestrator, it's because there's little bugs that people would email me like, why doesn't that work? And that's the problem with it right now. Anyway, so let's go back to where we were. All right, so here we have this here, and what you're seeing here is that, again, what we want to talk about is the pixel. We want to talk about pixel math, because that's what this is. This is not what we call a convolution kernel, like your blur and everything else, is actually comparing pixels around each other, but they're all doing operation on a single pixel. Pixel math is straight. It's going, I am going to do, this layer is going to affect, this pixel is going to affect the pixel below it. and it's very fast to calculate that. But you're doing that for every single pixel all the way across the thing, and each one of those is done in a very, very small fraction of a second, instantly. But that math is basically being applied. So it's the pixel on top to the pixel below it. So when we set this to multiply, what we're doing is we're saying, I'm going to set this back to normal. This is all 1, and this is 0, right? Now, the only thing that changes is somewhere along these edges, there's like 0.5, and there's 0.2, and there's it's going from 1 to right along this edge, it might be 0.9, and then right on the inside of the edge, it might be 0.6, and then it's 0, right? And right along this edge is where all the gray values are along the thing, and they're the thing that matter. Which is, we can talk about philosophically what that means. But anyway, but the gray is is what we consider resolution. When we run out of gray, we end up with big chunky, things that are going on. Again, there's a lot of philosophical parallels there.
Alex, is that called aliasing?
We do call it aliasing, yeah. Mm. And if you put something in without any anti-aliasing adds a gray to those edges. So, but to go back to the multiplication, when we multiply 1 to any color below it, it is 1 to any color below it. What does it do? 1 times that number. So if the pixel number is 0.5, 1 times 0.5 is 0.5. So basic math, not even math we needed to know in high school. This is just basic multiply. I'm multiplying 1 to 0.5, it's still going to stay 0.5. 0 to 0.5, it's going to go to 0. So that's why black knocks out the background. So it basically, you're multiplying 0 to whatever's below it, but you're multiplying small changes here along these edges is multiplying, 5 times 0.5, for instance, is 0.25. So it makes it darker. And so it is, so these changes here are the part that edge is kind of everything. And so when you understand the math, it starts to make more sense of what you're actually doing there. So then what I'm doing, so here I'm going to set this to multiply again. Now with the top part, if I just turn this top part on, let's see if I turn this on here. Now it will pop into it, and we'll talk about why that worked in a second. So for instance, if I have this is actually how an ATEM switcher works, which is that it is, because the head is over black, this actually works, because what it's doing is I'm screening over top of the background there. If I set this to normal, if I set it to normal, you'll see that it's back to what's there. Now, normally what an alpha channel will do, here's the inverse of that alpha channel. And if I group it to the channel below it, and I do the same thing, I say multiply, it will. Oops, I multiplied the wrong thing. Hold on. Oh, live demos are so great. All right, so we hit multiply here. And so what this did is it knocked out the background here. And so this is the RGB channel. When you have applied the alpha channel, it's what we call, you have pre-multiplied the alpha channel to the RGB channel, which means that you're always, that when you say I have a pre-multiplied RGB channel, so if the foreground is pre-multiplied, it means that you took the alpha channel and you already matted it to the RGB channel. And that is, and what that means is that you're guaranteed that everything that you don't want is made black. This is actually how your ATEM switcher doesn't do this last little bit. It assumes that you have a pre-multiplied channel. And if you have a white background, if I'm sitting with an object over white and I put it onto an ATEM, you'll notice that it all falls apart because the ATEM isn't doing this last operation, because it saves it one processor round to do that. So anyway, so so now when I take this and I screen it over top the screen, I would do add, but add disappeared from here a long time ago. I don't quite understand why Photoshop took that away. But anyway, so you're basically now adding the pixels back. So basically what you did is you multiplied the alpha channel to the foreground, reversed it, multiplied it, and knocked it out of the background. And when this background is 0, you're going to, as you add these values to it, like if I take this out, if I take this alpha, this knockout out, if I add the values to the background without a knockout in the background, so if I didn't multiply that alpha channel to the background, it would just look like this. It would just look like a fade into it. Whereas if I'm creating a hole for that foreground to sit in by doing that. And this is what your computer is doing all the time to create alpha channels. It's using these alpha channels all the time. It's knocking the background out. It's then setting the foreground into it. And that's how that works. And so that black and white image, I think I'm always attempting to try to explain it, because when you understand what it's doing, you can have a lot of fun. So for instance, if we, a lot of times we get into stuff like there's the background. Okay. So when you look at this and you go, a lot of people will use selection tools to pull, to pull this out. But what you can do is go, oh, well, I just know that I have channels, right? And I can just go look at my channels and see where I have the most contrast. In green, I have a lot of contrast. I'm gonna copy that into a separate channel here. Now, because I know that all I'm trying to do is create a black and white image. I don't need to use the color selection. I don't need to paint around it. I'm gonna just go straight into the RGB channels, find the one that has the most contrast. And now I'm going to work on that image. So for instance, here, I might, hit Command L. I can see, where there's a bunch of stuff here. So these two edges here are the gray, the light gray, and the lighter gray here. So I'm just going to pull this white channel. Say, I want to cut all of that, out. Maybe I'll leave a little bit of it there. I'll talk about that later. And I can move this in, but I have so much more control taking this channel and affecting it to get an alpha channel than I would if I had done anything else. Now I hit invert. Now I have a great little alpha channel that I can use here. Now, there's a little bit of errata down here, and what we typically do here to make that work is that I will oftentimes use a burn tool, set this to shadows, and then I can just paint out things that I don't like, right? And so, so you can paint this stuff out. So you're basically painting this out. Now this is up there. I don't really need that. So I can, just get rid of it here. And get rid of that there. So I can get rid of that there. But now if I want to make it more intense in here, I can simply go in, and oftentimes we'll take the dodge tool and I can just paint over that, and it's just going to bring it up a little bit to make it a little bit more, if I want to get rid of it and have it be a little bit brighter. But again, because I understand what an alpha channel is, I know that I can just go in and create my alpha channel from my RGB channels. And, we can do that with green screen. We can do that with other things. But once you start to understand how this actually works, that I'm just creating this transparency map inside of what I'm doing, it gives me a lot of power to integrate elements together to make that actually work. Same kind of thing here. If I have a sky that's here, I can go in and I have, let's say, a background here. I'm going to simply go into my channels, look for, the one that gives me the most contrast. Now I'll look at this and say, well, I've got a bunch of wider areas here. And so what I'll do is build a garbage mat. Now, what is a garbage mat? It's just a alpha channel with, let's see here. This is just an alpha channel that has hard edges. Like it's not, so you're sitting here compacting this. And again, this is what you do. You also do this with video by using garbage mats. And here, I know that I'm just trying to get this white to pop out here. So I'm going to, knock that out. And then I'm going to bring my levels back in and start to press down on this. And now I've created that alpha channel that I wanted here. I can invert that. I can select it by just holding down Command and clicking on it, go into my my background here, and apply it as an alpha channel. So here you can now see I've gotten rid of all of that background. So if I grabbed this here, oops. Create a layer underneath it. There you go. So the main thing is that by doing this, we're able to, when you kind of pull the stuff together, understanding how that works. A lot of people would use selection tools. They use a lot of other things. But when you understand how an alpha channel works, it gives you a lot of power to really interact with what's actually happening there. All right, let's go ahead and open it up to questions.
All right. Our first question here comes from Chris Weber, Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris says, not everything does alpha channels. What's your go-to when the program, say Keynote, doesn't support alpha out?
Keynote actually, it depends on what you're doing, but you can actually export a ping out of Keynote and set the background to transparent. So the Keynote will actually export files as a transparent. Now, it doesn't necessarily do it when you are. So what Keynote won't do is export a live video output with transparency. So if that's what you're trying to do, now, once again, when you understand what alpha channels do, a lot of times you can do things in Keynote that are just over black. So you can do, I can have something that's in Keynote that's over pure black. And then what I'll do is I'll raise up my blacks just a little bit. Inside of, all elements might be at 10% black, not 100% black. In my keyer, then I know that I have a couple pixels, like a 25 gray values that I can use to key something out. It doesn't mean I can do soft transitions, but it does mean that I can cut it out. So in Keynote, I can try to do this. This is dangerous for me to try to do this in front of you, but we'll see here. Let's answer the questions first, and then I'll go back. And try
Fair enough.
Because I wasn't planning to show that, so now I have to think about it for a second.
I want something next to the banana for scale. Just saying. This is Dennis Champion Walker in Mansfield, UK, comes up with our second question. Pixelmator isn't great at creating images for use in an ATEM with pre-multiplied key. You often end up with extraneous garbage that doesn't show anywhere but in the ATEM. Why is this?
Now we're getting back to exactly why we were talking about the pre-multiplication. So the reason that happens is that Pixelmator is not fully pre-multiplying that alpha channel. What the ATEM expects is that the RGB channel, there's two channels that are going to it. Well, there's RGB, there's four channels, there's RGB and A. But let's just say there is a color channel, that is the fill. The key is the alpha channel. What an ATEM assumes, and this is to save processor time or to save processor overhead, is the ATEM assumes you're going to give it a pre-multiplied alpha. So if we go back to the Photoshop, and what Pixelmator does not do is give you a purely pre-multiplied alpha. So what it does is if you have anything in that RGB layer, in the fill layer, if anything there, you're not going to be able to, let me see if I can do this really quickly here. If I cut to this, so this part here where I have, like if I had, let's see if I can do this quickly. So here's my background again. And if I create another layer, and let's say I put a different gradient on it, just so we kind of see. And hopefully this is going to work. I don't know if it's going to work, but we'll see. We're going to do this here. And then I'm going to take these two layers in Photoshop and I'm going to merge them. And now what I'm going to do without this alpha channel is I'm going to take this down here and I'm going to hide this. All right, now let me undo that. And I'm going to set this to screen. All right, now what you're going to notice is there was the hole. It filled in my RGB, but it also added a whole bunch of light over here. And the reason for that is that there's no alpha channel that is knocking out the foreground. Pre-multiplied alpha channels, when it says it expects a pre-multiplied alpha channel, it says, oh, I don't have to do that other part. I don't have to knock the foreground out because it's already black. I'm just gonna add it, technically add, not screen, but I'm gonna add it to the background. And there's not going to be anything else to worry about because everything I don't want is zero. But what we're missing is this second alpha channel. This alpha channel here that needs to be multiplied to it. So you see, when I turn that on, it multiplies that alpha channel to the foreground, multiplies the invert of that to the background, and I get a proper key. Without this one, without this calculation, without the multiplication of the alpha channel to the foreground element, both of them are, and what Pixelmator is doing is it's not knocking that out correctly. You will find that if you export a TGA from Affinity Photo, it will work perfectly. So Affinity may have added that specifically for ATEM users, and Pixelmator may have not added it specifically for ATEM users, and it's why I use Affinity. so it literally is just to build those files there. So the TGA output, the TGA is the file format that I find that works the best, where you're going to get every little detail out of your image that you're going to apply over top of an ATEM is a TGA, because it's going to pre-multiply that foreground, and it's supported at the core there. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He says, what codecs support exporting video files that retain alpha? What are the practical transport workflows where a device or app can send image data with alpha? And he notes NDI plugin for Adobe Creative Cloud, Keynote Movie with transparency, things like that.
Right. I haven't. Yeah. So Keynote will do it with transparency. I didn't know that NDI did it. Of course, we use Apple ProRes 444. When you see the 4444, that last 4 is the alpha channel. So that will carry it. TGA sequences, TIFF sequences. We use a lot of frame sequences to do that. So when you send out a TGA sequence you can send out that TGA sequence and load it into an ATEM switcher, for instance. It'll have all the alpha channels with it. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, when you use After Effects, a lot of times you have to say millions of colors plus, and then you add the alpha channel to the specifications of the codec you're using. But the thing that caught me by surprise along the way was when the ProRes high quality came out, and it's 4444. You don't have to put the add because it's already part of that specification with the extra 4 at the end. It's just referring to the alpha channel.
Yeah, and there's another thing that we're not talking about here as directly, but we can mention is straight alpha. What straight alpha does is, again, it assumes that straight alpha is usually used in computer graphics. It says, well, I'm not going to pre-multiply the background. I'm not going to pre-multiply the alpha channel. And what that allows it to do is, like with a lens flare, if you look at a pre-multiplied mat, I don't have a good example, but you'll just see all this color in big blocks because it just says, I'm just going to render all of what I need, when I know that when the alpha channel is added to it, will all have the transparency, but there's no transparency added in the render. And that's actually how computer graphics works when it's actually doing the composite. It's just dumping that out. The advantage of that, by the way, is if you're doing lots and lots of layers, especially of objects, if you're doing multi-pass rendering, if you add up all those layers, that if they're all pre-multiplied, you'll see light edges around them. Whereas if you do straight, it won't, because what you're getting is an additive effect of the gray values in the edges. So those are the codecs. The animation, QuickTime animation, has been kind of a workhorse for a long time. A lot of people don't use it for anything else. ProRes 4444. And then you have sequences, and I'm not sure those are the ones that we've used the most. DPX, of course, TIFF sequences, all of those will carry alpha channels with them. Next question.
Next one comes from Roscoe Jones in Brea, California. How does YIQ color model used in video affect your RGB calculations?
I don't know. So this is I don't think that this is the color space for analog NTSC televisions. I actually don't interact with YIQ that much. Essentially, it's not going to carry the alpha channel. It's just going to be color information. So you're going to it would need a separate carrier signal. So most video needs a separate carrier signal. That is, when you see key fill, the fill is the color data. The key is the alpha channel. I mean, essentially, it's a video alpha channel, and those have to be synced up perfectly to make it work. But the YIQ, YUV aren't going to carry alpha channels with them. There's no bucket for that. Next question.
Peter Belbin in Houston, Texas says, how does pre-multiplied alpha compare with straight alpha? And how does this work out when being used with ATEM switchers? We talked a little bit about that.
We talked a little bit about it. I'm sorry I don't have a great example of that, except I showed it a little bit. This is what I stressed. This is the effect that you would get with a straight alpha, which is that without that alpha channel, you're going to get it's not going to work. You can't send straight alphas to an ATEM switcher. You need to pre-multiply, always pre-multiply. It should be what you want to have on screen is in the RGB channel and the because what's happening is, again, what the ATEM's not doing is taking that alpha channel and knocking out the foreground. It's only knocking the background, and it's creating a hole for the background, and then it's adding the foreground on top. And what that means is that anything that's extraneous to it is going to show up over top. So you need to use pre-multiplied all the time with an ATEM. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, back with Luma versus Chroma Key. What are the pros and cons, and when would you use one versus the other?
I will very rarely use Chroma Key in these types of things, especially if we're talking about compositing graphics. And the reason for that is that most Chroma is 422. And what that means is that instead of having, so when you see 422, that means that my luminance, my black and white information, has 4 pixels, and for every 4 pixels, I have two of the U, 2 of the V pixels. And so what that means is that I have a half resolution. So if you are keying chroma, you are keying a image that is half resolution and then applying it, and what you'll end up with is aliasing along the edges. So some very slight stair stepping is going to go along your graphics if you're using a chroma key. So we use Luma keys for most of these things. And if I don't have a Luma key, I usually want an alpha channel with it. So I want a fill channel or a key channel that's coming with it, or I want a TGA sequence that's going to have an alpha channel with it, but I will rarely go to chroma unless pushed into a corner because it's that lower resolution. So where this really shows up is in your if you have like a little, if you are trying to key something like a bug into the corner of your image, and it's really small and it's got lots of little details to it, a lot of those details will get chunky, and you'll see this all the time, even in broadcast. You'll see little chunkiness in the logo, and you go, oh, they don't understand that part. They chroma keyed it. So like anytime you see like a little chunky, it's almost always that it was chroma keyed. It might be a resolution issue, but it's a problem with the alpha channel and how the alpha channel is being keyed. So when you see the chunky edges in broadcast or on someone's live stream, they don't understand the principles that we're talking about today, which is why we're talking about them today. So you definitely want to pay attention to that. There should be no reason for your little logo to be chunky. It should be perfectly smooth. And that has to do with understanding how the alpha channels work. Next question.
Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware here on the panel. Can we talk about alpha transparency like in your AV8 avatar's glasses?
Yeah. So this was rendered, oddly enough, right out of Memoji on the phone. The phone will export. One thing that I have to admit, I didn't know how to do when we did this for WWDC. I didn't know how to get. I thought I was just going to have to key myself over black from the emojis. And of course I asked Justine for one, and she sent me one immediately with a ping with an alpha channel. I was like, oh, okay, well, there's gotta be some way to do it. And then Renee sent me one really quickly, and it was perfect too. And I was like, well, they know something that I don't. And so I asked Renee. I was like, "Hey, how do you do that?" Turns out you can hold down on it once you've created it, and you can just cut and paste it in, and it'll just be a ping. So the ping file will carry that information. The ping file is not managed very well by an ATEM, but it is managed by most 2D graphics. And so you'll see just a little bit of shading here. That is because that's because it has, instead of black or white, it has a gray value. So the gray value is going to say, I'm not going to knock all of the background out, and I'm not going to keep all of the foreground. I'm going to have it be, so gray values are your transparency. They're your glass, but most importantly, they're your edges. Your edges, your nice soft edges are a result of a good transition from the black to the white, but it also manages any other transparency like glasses. And this is the kind of thing that's very hard to key and much easier to do if you're generating an alpha channel itself. The only other thing which we didn't do here, because we were over a black background, is always remember that it's not just transparency for glass. It's also distortion because of the glass itself. We get into building distortion maps from that transparency occasionally, but that's a whole nother second hour. Next question.
Santa Bart Gaffney in Akanamawak says, how do you fight an image with unsharp masking pre-applied when creating the alpha channel?
Oof, that's hard. So what's happening here, what he's talking about is that you'll get, if someone's applied any kind of sharpening, there's no such thing as sharpening. You see, like, I'm gonna just bring down the hard truth. There's no such thing as sharpening. When you do an unsharp mask, what you're doing is you're making the darker areas a little darker and the lighter areas a little lighter. So what you're doing a high pass filter, and you're basically just making everything just a little bit more. You're pushing the whiter to a little lighter and the darker to a little darker, and that creates the impression that the image is sharper. The problem with that is, which is what Bart is Santa Bart is pointing out, is that now I have little rings along here, and when I try to key it, I have a ring. So the unsharp mask it's very hard to get around. Usually what you have to do is use very gently, depending on how much unsharp masking has been added, you can do a minimum on the alpha channel. So that's going to say, or maximum, or minimum or maximum, depending on how you're doing it. But you're basically going to encroach on the alpha channel. You're going to cut the alpha channel just a little in. And what that's going to do is cut that edge out. Now, it's also, you're going to lose a little resolution. The foreground is going to be a little smaller. This is also why a lot of times we like to work with very high resolution video. So even if we're going down to 1080p, we might want to work at 4K so that we can creep in on that a little bit. But it's very hard to get that detail back. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, they have all kinds of plugins that deal with that, usually referring to it as choke. You're choking the mask a little bit in order to get the edges to come in or come out.
Yeah, choke and expand are two things that are often referred to. I think of it as kind of the straight, the very old way to do it is the minimum and maximum, which is looking for the minimum, looking around and take the minimum value of a minimum and a maximum, or a choke and an expand are not pixel operations. They're convolution kernels, which means that they say, if you take a minimum, just to go off for a second, if you take a minimum, what it does is it looks at all the values, and you say, I want 1 pixel. Well, it's going to look 1 pixel out. If you say it's a 2 pixel radius, I'm going to look 2 pixels out. That's how these work. It's looking at a grid, and it's going to go, if I have a minimum of 2 pixels, I'm going to go out 2 pixels out, and I'm going to find the minimum value. I'm going to replace the pixel here with the minimum value that I find around it, or the maximum value that I find. And the effect of that is that this one will get either darker or whiter, depending on what it's around. So that can help, again, expand a mat or contract a mat as you work. Next question.
Michelle Wilmington, Delaware, up next with, what's the relationship between alpha edges, aliasing, and the bit depth of your canvas, 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit?
It's a great question. So basically, the gray values, we were talking about the gray values, is you have everything about the quality of those edges is related to how many gray values you have. So you have you have 0 to 1, but that's not how it. 0 to 1 is an absolute value. Really, what it is with 8-bit, it's 0 to 256, and with 16-bit, it is, I want to say 40. Is it 4096? It's 12-bit. 80. I'm trying to do binary math in my head. I'm waiting for John Preto to save me, but he hasn't yet. So 10-bit is 1024. I think 12-bit is 4096, and I think that it's 16,000 something or other. so it's 16,000. And 32-bit is many.
16 million.
16 million. Because every bit that you add is, anyway. So you have an enormous amount of data there. Now, you don't need that many for an alpha channel typically, except for the fact that when you think about keying, you're not, like when you looked at me key a sky out, I wasn't using all the pixels. It wasn't black and then all the way to white. It's kind of gray, and that gray I had to increase contrast to knock it out. Well, that means I was only dealing with 0 to, let's say, 0.25, which means that I only had a quarter of those, which means that those edges were all being defined by like 64 colors. But if they had been defined by 16-bit, I would have had, many more, thousands of gradations. And so when I have more bits to describe the transition from black to white, it's not the transition from black to white, it's the transition from a subtle gray to another slightly lighter gray. I have way more data in that space and way more gradations. And when you run out of gradations, you end up with aliasing. So the more data you have in that alpha channel, the more gradations you have and the less chances you're going to have of aliasing. Because when you run out of the black and white, you end up with just chunkiness. Next question. Last question, maybe.
Next one comes to us from, I can't see it. Hang on a second. There it is. What are the lighting and composition considerations when adding transparent elements together? And he's interested in vanishing points, capture techniques, and so forth. And that's Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh.
So when you're compositing transparent elements together, obviously making sure that those elements look like they belong together. So some of the stuff that Josh called out is the vanishing points, making sure that the focal length is the same, camera position is the same, lighting is the same. Those are all important pieces. If you're actually capturing something you want to be transparent, this is where we were just talking about this. This is where the amount of resolution between 0 and 1, because what's going to happen in a transparent background is you're going to use, the thing with transparency is it's all going to be in grays, and it's going to be like here to here. Like it's going to be like this. So from 0 to 1, to get the transparency to work, you're going to be dealing with a very small subset of the black to white, because you're just shading it down, not knocking it out. And so the problem is this is where, a quality green screen, well lit, means that when you have, what you want is to have a really, really good, if you have inside of this transparency, you have a gradient, because let's say this would be a horrible green screen, what's behind me right now, because there's a gradient from light to dark, which means that not only do I have to deal with the fact that I only get a little subset, but I have a gradient in there that I have to cut out too. So now I'm in this like a subset of a subset. And so it's going to be very hard to get really good quality in there without it banding, because it's going to just run out of grays to work with. And so you want to have a very smooth background that you're going to capture against. You're going to want to have, you're going to want to think about, strong lighting, because what really makes transparency pop out is the highlights. So the white highlights and everything else really make you gather that image. So how you light it makes a big difference. Again, either oversampling by capturing at a higher resolution, or getting 444 data so that you can, so that you're not subsampling your chroma, is really important for those transparencies. And so, a 444 camera, which we don't have very many of, it's very hard to get 444 cameras. What it is possible to do is get a 4K or 8K camera. So if you're capturing at 4K at 422, the 1080 downsample of that is generally 444, right? Because it's you're oversampling. When half of 4K is still 1080p. so you can oversample by capturing it 4K or 8K or whatever. And now you're going to have tons of extra color data. You do the key at the higher resolution, and then you bring it back down, and you're going to find that you get a lot more detail. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Mitch Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. How would you create a key on your current Zoom image that would include those few random hairs on top?
I would definitely not do it with this screen. So to get all of the hairs, what I would do, and we used to do this. If you go back into the old office hours, I was getting pretty good detail out of my hair. But what I did there is I was keen on a Constellation, not on the ATEM Mini, because I was keying at 4K and going down to 2K for office hours. So that was one of my advantages. The other advantage is that when putting myself over the background, I knew that up here, as long as I don't have windows, the fall off doesn't really matter. And so what I did is I just didn't do a full key. I would key it so that this was generally transparent, but not 100% transparent. And by doing that, I didn't press down on that contrast, which meant that a lot of really subtle hairs, and because this is where the gray matters, right? Is, well, my gray, not just my gray hair, but the gray in the alpha channel matters, is all the little wispies that here. That's what really, and what you lose. People look at visual effects shots and they go, well, their green screen isn't very good. Well, their keys aren't very good either. look at how little wispies that you get. And when someone gets it right, you suddenly see a bunch of wispies. But the wispies are where you really feel like someone is there. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, the wispies is a compliment, because if you're able to key those, then you're doing one heck of a job. Yeah. And sometimes you end up with using more than one alpha channel, one for the center part. It's sort of like a mat for the center part of your body. Yeah. And then one that deals with the outside edges where it's really critical and maybe slightly transparent.
Yeah, a lot of times what I do is I do what I call procedural garbage mats, which is that I'll key myself or key something, right? Key a character. Then we were talking about that expand and contract. I will expand the mat out this way. So I'll push it really hard, like just, I only want this. And so it's pure black and pure white on this. It's not a good key, but then I expand it. And so what I end up with is this, right? That as a garbage mat. And that garbage mat is now, everything out here is black. So I'm only worried about what's right around the head. Then I key it again, or I take the same key and I contract it. So now I have another one that goes on the inside, and that's what I call my core mat. So now I have two mats that are knocking out almost everything that doesn't matter. Like everything that I know is white is white. Everything that I know is black is black. Now the next key that comes through here is only dealing with this edge, which is the thing that really sets it off. And so to Mitchell's point, building those procedural garbage mats are really powerful. And these are procedural, so I'm not even like drawing it. I'm just simply pushing it through. Now, the other thing that then what I may do is also, to Mitch's point, this gets a little tricky, it can be, is I will draw a mat like this over my head. I'll try to find a transition point, because sometimes the transition isn't always perfect between these two. Now I can mat this really hard, my lower area, and then this head where all the hair is, I have a different mat that might be a little bit more gentle, that I do a little bit more work on. So and what we tend to refer to this as divide and conquer, and how we try to get to develop a mat, and that's mostly in post. Obviously, we used to be able to do that in Conduit, the software that my former company made, where we could do all of that stuff in real time, but that hasn't existed for a while. Next question.
Next question comes from Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh. Many of us use Blackmagic Design ATEM switchers for production. What considerations should be taken when dealing with alpha and transparency when working with hardware and software solutions versus software solutions?
The big thing is just understanding how it does the calculation. When you understand how it does the calculation, now you're in a position to take full advantage of what it can do. So knowing that the Blackmagic switcher requires a pre-multiplied foreground is usually the biggest thing. So knowing that TGA sequences work the best, that you need to have a pre-multiplied foreground. When you understand those things, most of what the ATEM switcher does makes sense. Like it's predictable at that point. So those are the two things that I would pay the most attention to. I thought that this would be 15 minutes. I really thought this morning that I was like, we're going to get into this. We're going to talk about alpha channels for 15 minutes. And this is going to be another one of these like short ones, but it was not. A lot of great questions. So thanks to the folks who rolled with us in that area, and asked a lot of great questions and kept us going. So the producers did a great job. Thanks to the panelists also, especially for holding up when I had a technical issue. It's not something that would have killed the show, but there's what happens is for some reason, every once in a while, my teleprompt software will show the cursor because usually it's hiding the cursor. And so there's this little green cursor. And then eventually someone in the back end will, hey, your cursor's on your nose, your cursor's on your forehead or something like that. So I knew that was coming. And then I thought that I could I have a KVM right in front of me. So I switch between my computers and one of the computers is there. When I'm using my trackball, it all works perfectly. But when I use Logic, I use a Magic Pad because I can navigate faster. And so I was editing a thing the other day, and so because I can squeeze and expand really, really fast and everything else in Logic and move faster. So I use a trackpad. So what happened was I switched the KVM, and the trackpad was still talking to the thing, and the KVM was only giving me the keyboard, and then I went and grabbed the trackball, and then the ball fell out of the trackball when I went to grab it. And I was like, how many things could go? That's why finally I was like, okay, you guys got to take care of this for a second. I was like, how many other things can go wrong here?
No wonder you said cascading failures.
No, it was just like one thing after the other, like something that I reset that telestrator about once a week. And with it set in the normal state, it's like no one notices. I just turn off the key, I restart it, I bring it back up. I still don't know why it does that. And then I'm fine. And it was just because the trackpad was there, and then the ball fell out of the trackpad anyway. There you go. Since we had a minute, I just tell you what happened. That's all I got to say. Anyway, so thanks to everyone for running with that, and thanks to the incredible team in the background, just dancing with the whole. I'm going to stay here, and then I'm not. And to give you a little inside baseball, there, I had an unexpected event that happened yesterday that wasn't scheduled until Friday, like fully, like it was supposed to be further out, and it got jammed up. So I needed to take half an hour off so I could make sure I had something to show. For the second, I almost canceled. I was brushing my teeth this morning. It's like, I'm supposed to be talking today, and because it was the last couple of days has been me focused on logistics for a pretty high profile thing. So anyway, so that's the whole story behind what happened there.
That was one of the best alpha channel descriptions I've ever seen. And,
oh, wow.
And it only took less than a half hour or 45 minutes.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I wanted to do more. We'll do it again in another year. We'll have another discussion, but thank you. All right. Thanks to everybody. Now we're going to go ahead and jump into after hours. Look at how fast they did that transition. Just want to make sure people know that I noticed.
Trading. Oh my God, you're so awesome at that. You're so descriptive.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, man.
It's all just man.
Oh man, Alpha channels aren't gonna play Photoshop. Nope, not Photoshop. Great job.